So joining me now on the Goldie Taylor Project is author, lawyer, cable news legal analyst, an all-around awesome human being, I should say, is my dear friend, Lisa Bloom. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you, Goldie. That's very kind.
Lisa, I got a copy of your book, Suspicion Nation, last year. I went back to my hotel room and just sort of opened up the first page and said, let me just check out and see what this is about. I did not put the book down until I was finished about 12 to 15 hours later. It was just so gripping and personal to me, especially being the mother of black sons. And so, for those who aren't familiar, tell us about the book and tell us what inspired you to write it.
Well, thank you so much for reading it, and I'm glad it meant something to you. So I wrote the book Suspicion Nation after I covered the George Zimmerman trial extensively for NBC News and MSNBC. I'm a civil rights lawyer since 1986. I've handled many race and excessive force cases, and I've also been a legal analyst for various television networks for about 20 years, covering all the major cases. And so when I went out to cover that case, I approached it the way I would any criminal case, which is show me the evidence. I didn't think it looked good for George Zimmerman, but I came into it with an open mind. I don't want anybody convicted of a crime unless the evidence is there beyond a reasonable doubt. At the beginning, when I was covering the case, I thought, gee, I'm not seeing the evidence. The first week or two, I thought the prosecution had a weak case, and that's the way I called it on air. But I had my aha moment about halfway through the trial when, in the evening, I was reviewing the evidence as I would if I were trying the case myself, because you don't just look at the evidence once or twice. You continue to review it during the trial. And I noticed something very important, and that is that George Zimmerman indicated that the gun was holstered not only inside the waistband of his pants, but behind him.
Yes.
Behind his back. And that made his story completely implausible. His story was that he was on his back, that Trayvon Martin was on top of him, knees to armpits, and that Trayvon Martin, he said, saw the gun, reached for the gun, and threatened to kill him.
Sure.
And at that moment, Zimmerman says he had to pull the gun and shoot in self-defense.
I thought the entire story was just fantastical.
Yeah. And so unless Trayvon Martin had X-ray vision, there's no way that was possible. And I started to notice not only that, but other evidence that the prosecution had, but that they were missing and that they were failing to argue. And so by the end of the case, I realized this is a case that had gone off the rails, that unlike other cases where prosecutors argue their strongest evidence, they give the jurors a roadmap to conviction, they prepare the witnesses. This was a case that was very clear to me the prosecutors did not want to win, that they could have won, that they didn't want to win.
I had that same feeling, Lisa, but I had the very same feeling from St. Louis County District Attorney McCullough.
Yes.
I had that same feeling from the New York prosecutors who were involved in the Eric Garner case. I got the very distinct impression that these were cases that they didn't want to bring to trial in the first place. And certainly if they brought them to trial, they didn't want to win them.
Exactly.
That they literally, and Angela Corey, the prosecutor in Florida, that they literally got in their own ways and it seemed purposeful at times.
You're absolutely right, Goldie. And when the Trayvon Martin case was over, I had that feeling too. And, many of my friends like you who are mothers of African-American boys in particular just had this sick feeling in our guts, right? We just have this feeling that this, but, I don't want to base things just on feelings. I'm a lawyer. I want to look at the evidence. And so I went back and did my own investigation when that case was over, and I talked to witnesses and, most importantly, a juror, the only non-white juror, a woman named Maddie, and I opened the book with Maddie's story. And after reviewing all of the evidence and what happened there, this is a lot more than just a feeling. The reality is that this is a case that could have been won, that should have been won, but the prosecutors simply blew. And when you talk about Ferguson and New York, these cases are even worse. The subtitle of my book, Suspicion Nation, is The Inside Story of the Trayvon Martin Injustice and Why We Continue to Repeat It. The book came out in hardcover a year ago.
Right.
It's out now in paperback. It just came out in paperback.
Congratulations.
But the why we continue to repeat it part, I sure wish I had been wrong. But the last year has proven it right, unfortunately, as you say, especially in Ferguson and New York. I never thought I would be saying, well, at least in the George Zimmerman trial, but at least in the George Zimmerman case, the prosecutors were respectful to the family.
Sure.
We did not see that in Ferguson. At least in the George Zimmerman case, there was a trial.
There was a trial.
We didn't see that in Ferguson or in New York. You know, I mean, it seems to me it's getting even worse. In Ferguson, it's such an injustice. It was such a biased proceeding. I've read thousands of pages of the grand jury transcripts that was released to the public. Even though it's edited and redacted,
sure,
you still get a very strong sense of it. And I've tweeted, I've written a lot of articles on AVO, AVVO, where I blog, about what an injustice that case was, how biased the case was. And then we have New York and the chokehold killing of Eric Garner. We don't even have the grand jury transcripts released. We have no indictment.
We really don't. So no real
transparency
in any of it. You know, and you're absolutely right about this, and it's heartbreaking because, you know, you don't know. You know, as my sons are out in the world, you don't know what end of the spectrum they're going to fall on, whether it's just going to get a citation or if they're going to be treated respectfully or if they're going to come home, you know, on a coroner's cold slab. You know, you just don't know, and that's the fear for every parent of color, I think, in this country, you know, whether rightfully or not. But what we do know is that the frequency at which they are stopped, legal and illegal stops, is exponentially higher, you know, really than their white counterparts. You know, case in point, I know you've seen this, you know, our dear friend and colleague, and we spoke about this on yesterday's show, on Monday's show, our dear friend and colleague, Charles Blow, his son Taj, a third-year biology student at Yale College, Yale University. And let me just tell you, to get to Yale, you and I know, you got to do just about everything right in this world. And so he gets to Yale. You know, he's coming home from the library where he's going to check on a book that he's reserved that isn't in yet, and he is held at gunpoint by a Yale University police officer because he fit the description, they said. Forced to the ground on his belly until he could produce ID to show that he was a student at the university because a tall black male, tall black college-age male, a robbery suspect, had not been found. And so it seemed to me they must have been stopping every tall black male on campus. And so if Charles Blow's son is not safe, certainly mine isn't.
This is really the root of the problem, is racial profiling. And I talk about this a great deal in the book. This is what happened to Trayvon Martin. There's no question about it. You know, we all debated what George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin. There's no question that he did, because his story of the event always started with, there were two black burglars in the neighborhood.
Yes.
And one of the last witnesses called by the defense in the George Zimmerman trial was a young white woman whose home had been burglarized by two black men. The prosecution should have been on their feet. What did that have to do with Trayvon Martin?
Right.
To attribute the wrongs of two African Americans to all African Americans is the very definition of racism. But the prosecution never said so. And so we continue to see racial profiling not only in the courtroom in the Trayvon Martin case, not only in Ferguson, not only in New York and Los Angeles, where I live, very, very common, but across the country. And this is the root of the problem. And what most people don't realize is when we have statistics on racial profiling, we have extensive statistics in New York City because a federal judge ordered the police to keep very detailed records of their stops over many, many years. They have millions and millions of stops, stop and frisk stops. And what turns out is that when whites are stopped, they are more likely to be carrying contraband, drugs or guns, than African Americans or Hispanics. And yet, the police continue to disproportionately stop African Americans and Hispanics.
Absolutely astounding.
That's such an important fact because most people think, well, they're disproportionately stopped because they're disproportionately criminals. But that, in fact, is not true.
It certainly doesn't bear out when you take a look at the data. You know, Lisa, right. I know that, one, people ought to get your book, so I want you to tell them where they can pick it up today. I just think that it's such an important, critical, and compelling read. And two, you know, I just want to thank you. Thank you for being with me today and joining me on this show to to talk over some of these pressing issues. And tell them one word to get your book, and where can we find you next?
Well, thank you, Goldie. You're very kind. So the book is Suspicion Nation. It's newly out in paperback. It should be available wherever books are sold, obviously online, places like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and, of course, support your indie bookseller. So look there, Suspicion Nation by Lisa Bloom. Please follow me on Twitter, Lisa Bloom, or on Facebook, Lisa Bloom Author, my website, lisabloom.com, and my law firm's website is thebloomfirm.com. And I'd certainly love to hear from everybody, especially on Twitter. I know you are the queen of Twitter, and I am your humble servant.
Twitter consigliere, I am. It was so incredible to be with you today. I hope that I will get to see your lovely face again soon as I head to California in the next month or so. But again, Suspicion Nation is the name of the book, and the great Lisa Bloom, who is on the case. I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Great hearing you on the radio, Goldie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.